Okay, we can start right now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first class in December, the end of 2025. This class will be lead us to a very fresh topics that really need to be comprehended, especially in Indonesia, in global South, and also in global community of philosophy of religions, because we need to think again, we need to rethink about how we run the philosophy of religions, especially for the research and for the study itself. And this event grounded in several central questions that align with the terms of reference that has been sent to Professor Kevin and Professor Biswas. The question is about the object of study first, especially regarding the abstract, transcendental, or we called unnatural entities that so many people said that's kind of objects very inaccessible in every way, yeah. And the questions of the method, how we approach that abstract objects. Uh, we know that in doing philosophy of religions, we are coexist or on the same level, same spirit with the other discipline, for example, sociology of religions, anthropology of religions, and another religious studies that deal with concrete objects and how we as the people who join as the philosophy community in handling that objects. And beside that, we also face important questions about the bounds and identity of the discipline. How is philosophy of religion distinct from sociology of religions, anthropology, phenomenology, or psychology of religions? Because the objects are very similar, and we need to make a clear understanding in distinguishing that object. So we have to start this class, but first let me introduce two philosophers that has been join us today. And I would like to disclaimer that this is my personal testimony. I'm so glad to see two of my favorite philosopher, especially philosophy of religions. And the first, he is Professor Kevin Schilbrack. He's from Appalachian State University, United States, and regularly, Professor Kevin Schilbrack teaches and writes about the philosophy study of religions. It means that philosophizing study of religions, methodologically and systematically philosophy. And he is the author of Philosophy and the Study of Religions, Manifesto, one of his most phenomenal and important works in philosophy of religions, because I think it is a revolutionist and also reformist works in philosophy of religions in contemporary era. And he is presently interested in the relevance of embodied cognitions and social ontology for understanding what religion is and how it works. His current publications, Normative Evaluations in the Global Study of Religions, Philosophy of Religions Without Supernatural, very interesting. And do you practice the critical study of religions, the concept of religions as heuristic device, the realist discursive study of religions, the revival of realism and the study of religions, the danger of diversifying philosophy of religions, and emergence theory and new materialisms? I think this approach is very important for a contemporary philosophy of religions, because we need to deal with not only anthropocentrical beings, we also deal with non-human beings in studying religions. And second, we welcome Professor Prasenjit Biswas. from Northeastern Hill University, India, known for his work on phenomenology, post-colonial philosophy, as he already mentioned before that 1 month ago, he visited Universitas Gadjah Mada and held a public lecture on post-colonial philosophy, on hermeneutics, indigenous hermeneutics, and so on. Uh, Professor Biswas has a lot of publications. His current publications, Aporias of Indian Thought, infiguring ethno-tribal philosophy from India's northeast, and Phenomenology and Ontology of Humiliations in Man and Society, Journal of Northeast Studies. The next current publication is Daya Krishna's Presuppositionless Philosophy and the Sense of Self and the Inscrutable Substance of Ontology. Okay, that's all from our two distinguished speakers today. And next, I would like to explain our schedule for tonight class. First, we will kick off with 20 minutes presentation from Professor Kevin Schilbrack. And then next, we will have 20 minutes presentation from Professor Prasenjit Biswas. And after we hear and we see the material from Professor Kevin Schilbrack and Professor Prasenjit Biswas, we will have around 15 to 20 minutes to interactive dialogue between Professor Kevin and Professor Biswas. In this session, Professor Kevin will start by responding to Professor Biswas' presentations and followed by response from Professor Biswas. And finally, we'll open for the Q&A sessions for the last 20 minutes. Okay, we now invite Professor Kevin Schilbrack to deliver his presentations. Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this conversation. The central question that we're interested in today is this reflexive question about what is the discipline of philosophy of religion, or perhaps what should the discipline of philosophy of religion be? And I'm very happy to be included in this event because I am a philosopher of religion who has been a critic of how philosophy of religion has traditionally been practiced. I therefore wanted to take this opportunity to share with you some proposals about what the future of philosophy of religion might be. Philosophy of religion, it's one of the most recognized and established branches of the field of philosophy. And so a person might assume that the central scope and the boundaries and the methods of this discipline are now set. But I don't think that's true. I think we're in a time when the discipline of philosophy of religion is getting challenged and tested and probed and critiqued. And so in my talk today, I wanted to discuss three of these challenges and share with you how I think that these three questions should get answered. So my first one will be scope, and my second one will be boundaries, and my third one will be methods. So my first question has to do with the scope of philosophy of religion. And by that, I mean, so what are the objects of study that fall within the scope of this discipline? What are the objects that they look at? I've been critical of what philosophers of religion have traditionally taken as the scope of their discipline. Traditionally, they have focused on questions about belief in God, and they ask questions like this: is there evidence that God exists? Or is there evidence that God does not exist? And some people say, well, the existence of the universe must be evidence of a creator. Or they say the existence of these complex structures like our eyeballs or our lungs, they provide evidence that there is an intelligent designer. And other people disagree, and they argue. Other philosophers have argued that the reality of pointless suffering in the world provides evidence that there is no God. There's no omniscient and loving being watching over the world. Um, Philosophers of religion argue about, well, what are the properties of God? And if a being is perfect or if it's worthy of worship, what would it be like? And some critics say, but if God knows everything and that's one of God's properties, then God would know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And that suggests that I don't have free will. But other people disagree. So those are some typical questions in philosophy of religion. They fill the traditional philosophy of religion textbooks and classes. And I think that they raise interesting metaphysical questions, interesting epistemological questions. But as you could tell in my short summary, they all have to do with theism. They all have to do with God. But there's just many religions around the world that have other focuses, other interests that are not theistic. Um, some religious communities hold that what is divine is not a being that watches over us or that is like a person with a mind. Instead, maybe it's the nature of reality as a whole. And pantheistic religious philosophies like that say that what is divine isn't separate at all from creation and doesn't watch over creation. Other religious communities say that there's multiple divine beings. Some say that what is divine is some kind of guiding principle, like the Tao or the Logos. Some say that what is divine, indigenous religious philosophies say that what is divine is part of the natural world itself. Now, all these alternatives to theism have received very little attention in philosophy of religion. the, the scope of philosophy of religion has been narrow. So, in my book that was mentioned at the outset, I argued that philosophy of religion should take as its object not only theism, not only God, but the religious philosophies of all the religious forms of life around the world and in human history. My view is that the scope of philosophy of religion should not be narrow and focused. Instead, it should be broad and inclusive. Sometimes I just use one word and I say the scope of philosophy should be global. And in this way, philosophy of religion would not be merely a philosophy of theism, but it would live up to its name and it would reflect philosophically on all religions. Um, I think that is the best answer. But if philosophy of religion aims to be global in its scope, then it raises important hermeneutical questions about how philosophers can do conceptual justice to the ways of life that are unlike their own. Before today's event began, I was speaking with the other participants about how to build bridges between cultures so that people can understand each other and people can learn from each other. That's not easy. That is a complicated, messy situation. Um, it might be that the narrow scope of traditional philosophy of religion means that the concepts that used to be used have to get adjusted or they have to get dropped and replaced in order to study the full range of religious philosophies around the world. Maybe we need to change the very idea of religion, what we mean by religion, in order to do justice to all the different ways that people integrate beliefs about supernatural or super empirical realities into their lives. I think that's true. I think if you Google my name, you'll see that I've written about how to think about the concept of religion. Um, but philosophers of religion should include within the scope of their work critical reflection about how we think about religion. Um, a global philosophy of religion has to reflect not only on the beliefs and practices of all the different kinds of religious people, but also the beliefs and the practices of scholars of religion. They have to ask, well, what is religion? What do I mean by religious belief? What is a religious practice? What does it mean to explain religious behavior or to define or to translate or to interpret? So this second set of questions, we might not call them philosophy of religion, actually. We might instead say that's philosophy of religious studies. Philosophy of religious studies says, what is the ontology, the epistemology, the ethics of the academic study of religion. And I think that is a new question. Maybe it's been implicit or hidden or assumed, but I'd like to make it explicit and be conscious about whether we're working in that field of philosophy of religious studies. I think it's a new field that has not yet been much explored. It's not part of traditional philosophy of religion, but I think it could be a part of a new kind of philosophy of religion that scope is critical and self-reflexive. So I said I wanted to talk about three things. That was scope. Now, number two is boundaries. What are the boundaries of philosophy of religion? The academic study of religion is not a discipline. It's a multidisciplinary field, and it includes anthropology and history and comparative studies, sociology, cognitive science, psychology, gender studies, and on and on. It's a rich multidisciplinary field. And the boundaries between traditional philosophy of religion with its small scope and the other disciplines were relatively clear because the traditional philosophers of religion were only focused on the rationality of belief in God. But when philosophy of religion becomes global in its scope, then its scope becomes like anthropology of religion. It becomes like history of religion, like comparative religion. So then the question arises, well, what's distinctive about philosophy of religion? What's unusual or different about the tasks of philosophy of religion? And I think there's not a good consensus on that. It's not a settled question. Here's my suggestion about what is distinctive about philosophy of religion. The traditional questions of philosophy, not just philosophy of religion, but philosophy in general, they are normative questions in the sense that they want to find out what people should believe and what people should do. For example, ever since Socrates, philosophers have considered certain beliefs that people hold, and they said, are those the beliefs true? Are those beliefs that a person should hold? And then they also examine experiences that people have, and they say, but are those experiences of real things? Are those experiences that a person should have? And they've looked at the institutions that people have created, and they have said, are those institutions just? Institution of slavery, institution of marriage, institution of capitalism, all kinds of social structures like that. And fourthly and lastly, philosophers have examined the actions that people do, and they have said, but are those actions moral? Are they what a person should do? So these are all judgmental questions. They're all evaluative questions, and that's what I mean by normative. So my suggestion is this: the boundary between philosophy of religion and other disciplines in the academic study of religion is that philosophy of religion can ask whether religious beliefs are true, whether religious experiences are veridical, whether religious institutions are just, and whether religious actions are moral. This would put philosophy of religion in line with the usual practice of philosophy, the traditional practice of philosophy. But maybe this is obvious as soon as I say it, that a normative philosophy of religion raises a serious issue. If philosophy of religion is going to be global in scope and also normative in its task, then it's going to involve people who stand in one place and they see the world from that perspective, from that historical, social, cultural perspective. But then they're going to be normative and judging the religions of other people. That is a tricky, difficult, emotionally difficult, politically difficult situation. Should philosophy be normative and judgmental in this? There's no way for a person to leave their body, leave their culture, leave their language, and just see the world as it is. It's always going to be perspectival. So the question is this: is there a way for philosophy of religion to be normative and evaluative and judgmental, but not in a way that's simply cultural imperialism? That's not simply just saying, well, the way you do things in your religious form of life is not like the way we do things in my culture, and I don't like it. And that's a kind of not just relativism, but uh, cultural imperialism. So the proposal I'm suggesting that philosophy of religion be global in its scope, but normative in its boundaries and its difference from the other disciplines in the academic study of religion is super controversial. So that is what I think, but I think that I'm just raising questions that are not settled, and that I admit that they're difficult. Okay, here's my third and my last question. It takes a little bit longer than the other two, but you'll see that it's integrated with what I've said so far. Sorry, I dropped my notes. So my third and my last question has to do with the methods of philosophy of religion. Um, I think it's common for philosophers to make a distinction between methodological naturalism and ontological naturalism. If you read in this area of methods, you'll often see MN for methodological naturalism, ON for ontological naturalism. That way you don't have to write these, 8-syllable words. Ontological naturalism, ON, that's the position that one holds, in which one holds that the only things that exist are natural entities. That's not ontological naturalism. The ontological naturalist says there's no gods, there's no angels, there's no devils, there's no supernatural beings at all. And this is the position that gets taken by atheists. And it implies that when a religious person explains events in the world in terms of some supernatural being like God or Satan, or some supernatural principle like the Tao or the law of karma, the ontological naturalist would say that's an error. That's a mistake. That's not true. That's ON. Methodological naturalism is different. Methodological naturalism is the position in which one holds that when you look for the causes of events, the causes of things that happen in the world, one is just not going to look for supernatural entities. One's not going to use supernatural explanations. So if you say that you're a naturalist, not ontologically, but only methodologically, that's like saying, I'm going to wear glasses that will not let me see supernatural entities. You're not denying ontologically that supernatural entities might be real, God might be real, the law of karma might be real. But you're saying, for the purposes of your method, for the purposes of an academic inquiry, one's not going to check whether to see supernatural entities are the causes of events. My sense is that almost every scholar in the university accepts MN. They accept naturalism methodologically because we don't see historians, if we read history books, we don't see historians arguing, well, this army won the battle, and the reason why, the cause of their success, was because God was on their side. That's not what history books say any longer. Maybe they did 200 or 400, 600 years ago, but not anymore. And if you look at chemistry, you don't see chemists arguing that if you have sodium atom and a chloride atom and you combine them and you make salt, that is because it's God's will. Like the chemistry journals, the chemistry books, the chemistry classes are not going to bring supernatural entities into their explanations. So my sense is that in the university, almost everybody is a methodological naturalist already. In addition, my sense is that outside the university, most professional people are also naturalists in this methodological sense. I think it's very rare that you would go to a hospital and hear a doctor tell you, well, look, the cause of your sickness is a malevolent spirit. I think it would be extremely rare for one to go to a courthouse and hear a judge say, well, the accused criminal is innocent because they were possessed by the devil. Um, this is true even when the doctor or the judge believes in the supernatural, believes in God, is a religious person. They still adopt methodological naturalism when they're, you might say, when they're wearing their doctor hat or when they're wearing their judge hat. They adopt methodological naturalism. I think methodological naturalism is widespread and maybe the dominant position for professions all over the world. So it seems clear to me, now here's a contested issue. It seems clear to me that one can be a methodological naturalist even if one believes in God or even if one believes in other supernatural realities. One can be a doctor who believes in God, but when one is acting in one's role as a doctor, one doesn't explain sickness and health in terms of the will of God. And one can be a judge in a courtroom who believes in the law of karma, but when one acts in one's role as a judge, one doesn't decide punishments based on this idea. Well, the crimes were caused by the bad karma of a person's previous life, or the punishment. I don't need to give this person a punishment because punishment will be taken care of by a person's future rebirth. Um, you might believe in those things, but they just don't come into the courtroom. So I think that the two are distinct, methodological naturalism and ontological naturalism. But there are many philosophers who say, no, methodological naturalism implies ontological naturalism, or it assumes that ontological naturalism is true. That's why they're excluding the supernatural. And these other philosophers, they say, for that reason, if you believe in God, or if you believe in some other supernatural reality, you should oppose not only ontological naturalism of the atheists, you should also oppose the methodological naturalism in the university. Um, I don't think they're right, but it's an open question. And I think we need philosophical help thinking about this, about the question of the relationship between MN and ON. I think that question belongs in the philosophy of religious studies that I said was a new and emerging field. Should philosophers of religion adopt methodological naturalism as a rule for their work? Should all philosophers of religion practice philosophy as if supernatural entities do not exist, even though some of us think that they do exist? In my opinion, that would be the best thing to do. If philosophers of religion were to adopt methodological naturalism, MN, then they would be adopting the rule that is held by other scholars in the academic study of religion, the other scholars in the university, and most professionals like doctors and judges in the modern world today. When philosophers of religion do not accept methodological naturalism, they make an exception of themselves, and they choose not to work by the rules that almost everyone else in the university and the modern world are following. I think that this is the primary reason why other scholars in the academic study of religion do not want to include philosophy of religion in their field. They say philosophy of religion does not belong in the academic study of religion because we are all naturalists methodologically, but philosophers of religion are not. um, there are philosophers of religion who include God and other supernatural realities as the explanations for events. And they say, well, if we want to understand the world, we have to read Revelation, we have to read Scripture, we have to believe in God and include God or whatever supernatural beings they think are real. Um, they believe in intelligent design or miracles in history, or they say that's why God prevents evil, is if you read Revelation. So when they do this, it convinces other scholars in the university that philosophy of religion is not a legitimate academic field. Instead, it's a confessional approach that would be better suited for a seminary or for a religious institution, and it doesn't belong in the university or in the academic study of religion in particular. Adopting methodological naturalism would help to get rid of the reputation that philosophers of religion have that they are secretly theologians. Okay, so I don't think it's been appreciated yet that if a person agrees that scholars should adopt methodological naturalism, that philosophers should adopt it, it's not yet clear what is included in the category of the natural world, because there's several different versions of naturalism. If someone says, I'm only going to accept explanations in terms of natural entities, what are the natural entities? The world is a strange and complicated place. So, what counts as natural? So, I want to make a proposal about that, and that'll be my closing idea. Some people answer this question and they say natural entities are the entities that are recognized by the natural sciences. Basically, they mean cells of different kinds, molecules of different kinds, atoms of different kinds. The natural sciences do not recognize the existence of money or morality or even minds. Mental entities like intentional thoughts are not recognized in biology or chemistry or physics. The biologist and the chemist and the physicist has intentional thoughts, but those are not entities that they recognize. They don't accept explanation in terms of what people believe or desire or hope or fear. Um, some naturalists are not just saying cells and molecules and atoms, they even are more limited and they accept, what's natural is only the realities, only the entities recognized in physics. I have a colleague who's right down the hall, and he says, "You, Kevin, are nothing but fermions and bosons." And those are subatomic particles. Um, that hurts my feelings because, I have tenure and I don't know how fermions and bosons can get tenure. But this is basically scientific naturalism, and it's a reductive view. Um, I think that if we are to adopt methodological naturalism, it should be a non-reductive naturalism. It should not be scientific naturalism. Sometimes people call it liberal naturalism. If you Google that, there's a book called The Handbook to Liberal Naturalism that has 40 articles in it. I like to call it expansive naturalism. In any event, it's a non-reductive naturalist that does not accept explanations in terms of entities that are supernatural, but it recognizes the existence of money and morality and minds. Basically, I think subatomic particles of fermions and bosons that my colleague was talking about, they come together and they make atoms. Atoms come together and they make molecules. Molecules come together and they make cells. Cells come together and they make animals. Animals come together and they make groups. So we've got this model of the entire natural world stratified into physics and chemistry and biology, but then it keeps going to psychology and sociology. And we have, so to speak, 5 levels. All of them are natural levels. Every level is still part of the natural world. This means that a methodological naturalist would accept explanations like, she did this because she believed in God, or he did this because he wanted more money. An expansive naturalism is the methodological framework that I think would work best for the university. Okay, so thank you guys for your attention. Just to say one sentence that summarizes everything in my proposal, I think philosophy of religion should be global in its scope. I think it should be normative in its boundaries. And I think in terms of method, it should move away from confessional theology by not accepting explanation in terms of supernatural entities. Instead, it should accept an expansive naturalism. And I wanted to thank you again for inviting me here and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Gavin. One point that really got me that you mentioned that methodological naturalism should not be reductive. I think it will be face a lot of challenge from the naturalism itself, and I think the audience have several questions about that. And next, we will move to Professor Prasenjit Biswas with the same allocation time, 25 minutes to complete your presentations. And okay, the floor is yours, Professor.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rodinal, for organizing this uh, very ingenuous kind of a forum where we're discussing some of the unresolved and also very vital issues about understanding the role of religion and reconceptualizing the whole idea of religion as such, towards which I think Professor Kevin has given a very systematic exposition, and we are left with certain dilemmas after what he has pointed out in the form of methodological naturalism. Of course, I am not traversing the same route. I would go in a different way in the sense of understanding an anthropological idea of religion and how an anthropological idea of religion actually provides us a kind of a pluralist ontology about understanding both the natural and the supernatural without divorcing one from the other. So therefore, it's a kind of a joint creation of the world. The world cannot be without the supernatural. It has to be together, a certain kind of a supernatural crafted as natural, and natural transformed into supernatural. And both these crafting and transformations are launched from here and now, from this world, and not from an otherworldly position. And when I say that this kind of crafting and transforming the whole idea of supernatural and natural between themselves gets intertwined, I would simply say that this is something very cultural. It's culturally intertwined that the supernatural could be superimposed on the natural, and the natural can live the life of the supernatural. And both supernatural and natural can exist as a kind of metaphor, a metaphor for a certain kind of yearning to the unknown, which is yet to be known and which is yet to become a part of the known world. So, therefore, there is an ontological gap here between the knower and the known, the subject and the object. And it is through this ontological gap that we try to throw a certain kind of a pluralist light, a light that sort of lightens our felt depth and aliveness of the natural world itself. And it is encountered in embodied perception, not in terms of literally seeing the spirits, but in a non-reductive acknowledgement and engagement of the experiential meaning that is generated by this whole idea of spirits. So therefore, one of the working notion is the notion of spirits. Now, the notion of spirit cannot be defined in a naturalist sense. It remains as something undefined, but at the same time, it is finding its place in every understanding of the relationship between the natural and the supernatural. So spirit is the bridging connotation, or the bridging coinage that can sort of bridge up between the supernatural and the natural, given the kind of ontological split or the ontological gap that exists between the supernatural and the natural. And therefore we can understand that there is a kind of a inner kind of a light that is thrown on the natural way of things, not in terms of conceiving a personal God, but in terms of conceiving a certain set of practices, practices like, let's say, meditation, or practices like spirit possession, or practices like a certain sense of relationality with something that is alien, but at the same time is present in our familiar world. So there are ways in which a kind of a cognitive action or cognitively inactive action follows from our very sense of living in a world that requires spirits and certain manifestations of those spirits. Now, some of these manifestations goes towards something that is known to be mysticism, while some of these manifestations of the spirits are more experiential. They are more touchable, that which touches our consciousness, and in turn we try to touch them in a certain way. They act as a kind of a touchstone, I can say, these spirits. And these touchstones are, again, another kind of metaphor, a metaphor that bridges up the gaps in our experience. But at the same time, these metaphors are not reducible to something like a natural kind or something like a semantic kind. So you have this, once again, a kind of a linguistic barrier here between the metaphor of spirit and what it connotes or what it denotes. So you cannot understand spirits in connotative and denotative terms. You even cannot understand spirit just in experiential terms, because this experiential understanding of spirit has to be further translated into what it can mean or what is meanable by it. Everything is not meanable when the experience is owned up, or experience becomes one's own experience. Everything in that process of becoming is not meanable. Certain part of that experience remains unmeanable or unspeakable. Certain part of that experience becomes sayable, and certain part of that experience remain unsayable. That which is sayable also doesn't necessarily shows itself off, as Dilthey or Wittgenstein would like to say. So therefore, there is something like a secret in what manifests as spirit. And this notion of secret comes in multifarious ways in terms of a number of expressions. expressions that are available in major religious scriptures. For example, in Advaita Vedanta, the secret comes in the form of the ultimate reality or the Brahman. In Torah, the secret comes in the form of a perennial absence, the negative theology of Torah. Or in Islam, it comes in the form of Fatah or a kind of Ummah or some such expression that talks about ultimate annihilation of the being. So therefore, there are multifarious expressions of this spirit in terms of something that is mystical, in terms of a later rendering into a conceptual paradigm or into a conceptual apparatus. But what all this tells us is that we do not have a final or ultimate vocabulary to understand the spirit and its manifestation. Now, suffice it to say that this phenomenon of something that comes near to us, something that is proximate to us, and at the same time, something real, something that remains uncapturable, is this kind of a wavering between something that is immanent and something that transcends the boundaries immanent and transcendent. That is never complete. It's a kind of
Sorry,
an
Professor.
indeterminate, it's a kind
I
of an
think you lost
indeterminate,
the connections. Yeah.
lost the
Okay.
connection.
Yeah.
Just for
Is
a
it there?
moment, if you want
Yeah.
to go
Just.
back 2 or 3 sentences, just for a moment,
Mhm.
you went silent.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I just wanted to say the spirit manifestation is in the form of something that is, and that which is yet to become or yet to come. So it's a journey from what is to what is yet to come. And this journey is never complete. This journey is indeterminate. The sheer indeterminacy of this journey actually creates a kind of a motivation, a kind of a moral ordering, a kind of a spiritual motivation to continue a certain kind of a quest. Is a kind of a quest towards the unknown, the intimations of which comes through a certain intuitive understanding of a reality that is beyond. And at the same time, the reality beyond is not really outside the field of consciousness. So, therefore, a reality beyond which is like an exterior, but an exterior that can be interiorized by using a certain mode of cognitive or enactive cognitive exercises in terms of its phenomenology. And you know the concept of heterophenomenology, where we are talking about an enactive mode of consciousness in terms of capturing something which is not there. But the fact that we have captured it in the form of a being, and the fact that that uncapturable capture of the being finds its expression in a variety of ways, in a number of ways in which we can textualize it, we can poetize about it, we can sing about it, and we can even think about it. This entire process of enactment of the whole range of cognitive faculties is something that goes beyond the mere faculty of understanding. It leads us to something, towards something which is still not captured by us. It leads us to something which is a kind of a mystic being which awaits somewhere, which we do not know where we get to, when we get to it, and where we get to it, and how we get to it. So there is this kind of an opaqueness of spiritual faith. And this opacity of spiritual faith is expressed in a very refined, in a very cultivated style in a number of cultures. I would like to give some examples from various ethnic communities and tribes, because I want to give an understanding of anthropological naturalism as different from ontological naturalism. Anthropologically, naturalist explanation retains the key aspect of ontological naturalism by being non reductive and by conceiving of a domain of spirits and entities which can be interrelated in terms of roles, relationships, in terms of possession, in terms of attribution of certain properties, in terms of attribution of agencyhood in those entities and beings. And all these action that happens in and around that domain of beings is something that is a kind of a natural way of exercising our cognitive ability. And this is something that provides us a certain depth because it's uncertain, because it drives us towards the unknown. And therefore, it's a kind of a broader form of naturalism instead of a certain time that motivates us towards a certain practice of contemplation, certain practice of speculation, certain practice of meditation, and maybe a certain practice of illusionism or delusionism mixed with a sense of moving beyond the here and now reality with which we are immediately encountering or immediately familiar with. Something like a mediated sense of reality with an altered state of consciousness, which drives us towards a kind of a journey towards a being which is yet to become. And this finds its refined expression in a variety of cultures. For example, in Khasi culture, we say that Khasi culture is a major culture of the northeast of India. It arose with the Mon Khmer people. It dates back to around 10,000 years back. There is this Khasi faith in a creator god whom they call as Uble or Kable. It's not a gender neutral god. The god has two forms, both feminine and masculine form, masculine and feminine together in the notion of the ultimate spirit or ultimate God that created this universe and it created all other beings. Of course, part of it also involves a certain kind of theodicy because Uble, through willing, has created humans or other creatures who can rationally decide to act in a manner which could be considered as morally not so correct. So there is this possibility of a certain kind of an action based on a certain kind of a reason, which realizes a certain sense of depravity that is involved in Uble's creation of creatures, including the humans, animals, and other creatures. And in Khasi language, we say that ka kitin kam day ban pinia brew. Language should not kill us, we say. So the language of expression, language of articulation, shouldn't be such that it kills the very spirit of understanding this world of spirits, the world of spirits that's created by Uble and Kable. Now, this finds its concrete expression in social relations, in terms of a certain kind of ethical foundation of the kinship relationship. And that they say that clans arise from the mother. It's not merely a sociological fact. It carries an ontological, ethical, and spiritual meaning. The maternal source of being signifies that all existence is received through care and relationship. To be born from mother's line means to be part of a moral world governed by reciprocity, care, and not by domination. And Khasis have a matrilineal system to follow it up as a kind of a concrete social expression of part of this, what is created by the creator God, Kable, the maternal side of God, Kable. The matrilineal system is thus an ethical articulation of Khasi understanding of being. It ensures that lineage and ritual responsibility. Mei Raimu is the mother art.
Sorry,
And
Prof. Biswas, we
Yabiu.
lost you for 3 seconds. Can you repeat your last sentence?
Okay, sure. Please. 1 second. Am I back? So I'm saying that mother, the life giver, mirrors the mother art in Khasi language, Mei Ramiu, and the pristine originary mother called Yabiu. Mei Ramiu and Yabiu, the two forms of motherhood. Motherhood as an expression of creation, But this expression of creation is connected and correlated with Kabli, the maternal side of the creator God. And existence depends on nurturing the large chain of beings, both living and ancestral, who sustain the world and who arise from the maternal side. Now, the human, Parkasi ontology, occupies a central and yet a humble role. As the mediator between worlds, humans are the only beings who can respond consciously to the call of the higher beings. They stand in the middle between the visible, Kapite Ba Yohi, and the invisible, Kapite Bim Yohi. And through ritual, speech, conduct, they maintain the balance between them. To live ethically is thus to live in correspondence with this layered order of being. The Khasi moral vision, Kajin Seng Timman, teaches that wrongdoing is not just a violation of human law, it is a disruption of the relationality that sustains existence. Acts of greed, deceit, and disrespect weaken the harmony of life itself. So you can understand that a larger anthropological discourse takes over the very understanding of the spirit and this quest for the being. Without this anthropological kind of a discourse, we won't be able to understand the very construction of a core value or a core notion of self. When I say core value or core notion of self, that also is a methodological necessity, because without a core notion of self, we won't be in a position to talk about how this entire belief structure is translated into a kind of a layered structure of faith or a layered moral order. In order to understand this multi-layered structure of faith, what we need to understand how the self is constructed. And a certain power which is intrinsic to the self is conceptualized as if it's an expansion or extension of the spirits which are all around. And it's called Ka Ringyu in Khasi language. I'm referring to Ka Ringyu because of the ancestry of the Mon Khmer tradition. In the Mon Khmer tradition, Ka Ringyu marks the peculiar feature of the persona that embodies the virtues of the self, and that finds an expression in the form of a first person, second person, or third person self. A self which is basically a relational self. A relational self expresses itself through the core value of Karingu, which in English translation is very difficult to translate, but at the same time, it can be translated roughly as the core, the innermost values that constitute the self. It's a kind of a constitutive value without which the self cannot get constituted. Now, this constitutive value of the self is implanted in the world in a certain way, and a certain map of relationality is drawn up through this implanted sense of the self. So I would like to say that methodologically, this whole notion of self, this whole notion of a journey towards being, this whole notion of structuring the society in and around a creator God is something very ethnographically ingenuous. It's something that is specific to that cultural ambience. And there could be many such cultural parallels, especially in the Javanese or in the context of Indonesian culture. We have this concept of butinage. People who believe in a certain faith, especially the indigenous local faith, can easily translate it in the language of the other faith. And they can just change over, cross the border, and join the other faith, and yet come back to their own faith. So all the time, this practice of butinage happens across Java, Bali, and other regions, Sumatra, and other regions of Indonesia, which we call as butinage. Those practice of religion is the practice of the butineers. And this practice of the butineers is a global practice. And in that sense of crossing over from one religion to the other, of course, this crossing over is not without barriers. The ontological barrier, the barriers of boundaries have to be crossed over. And that crossing over requires a certain kind of a joining up with the other beings or the other souls. How does one join up up to the other souls and the other beings is again a kind of a very ingenuous practice. It's a very unique form of practice which cannot be generalized in terms of a kind of an available mode of practice. The availability of butinage, which arises from a certain cultural crossover, is something to the specific locale, especially to the archipelagos of Indonesia. And it moves beyond the shore of Pacific Ocean and goes up to the east of Africa, that we see a large number of indigenous communities are having this experience of butinage, crossing over from one faith to the other faith and returning to one's own faith. So I see that philosophy of religion has a great future in butinage, and butinage seems to be a very bright prospective future of the study of philosophy of religion. And the other part of the study of religion is this unknown aspect of the being, which is not capturable in our language, and language should not kill us. And with these words, I would say that I identify two major aspects: butinage and this unknown quest towards the unknown being. These are the two major aspects that keeps religion alive, and that makes it possible to continue with our anthropological practices of connecting ourselves to a supernatural being, and translate the supernatural being into our own world, into our own home in the heart, and at the same time again retranslate the home in the ark in terms of ancestry, in terms of certain connections which are cosmic, and therefore supernatural to natural and natural to supernatural, and to and fro movement is part of butinage. And that actually makes us capable, or enables us to cross over from one faith to the other faith as well. I think this is what I wanted to say, Dr. Rodinel. I think with this, I end up presently, and we can talk later. Thank you all for listening to me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Biswas. Now we are entering the interactive dialogue sessions between Professor Kevin and Professor Biswas. Professor Kevin, would you be willing to share your thought on Professor Biswas' presentations? But I will shortly remind the point that I take from Professor Biswas, that he proposed the pluralistic ontology, the understanding the diverse or the vast scope of religious philosophy of religions object, yeah, including natural and supernatural entity. And the next interesting point, that we also face the big gap between subject and object. How can we manage the variations of the objects from the abstract one to the concrete ones? Yeah, could you give your elaboration, Professor Schilbrack?
And I
Thank
should
you.
speak for fewer than 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It sounds good. Well, I want to thank Professor Biswas for his talk, and just to repeat how excited I am to be a part of a conversation like this, because I'm a member of a group that actually calls itself the International Society for Philosophy of Religion, but they're not very international. They tend to be white, Christian, analytic philosophers. This is maybe the core of traditional philosophy of religion that I said I was criticizing in the past. And it's frustrating to be in that group sometimes, because they will say, well, let's look at David Hume and his criticisms of theism, and let's defend theism from these criticisms about design argument or the problem of evil. And that's all they talk about over and over. And I've never been at a conference where you get to hear about the Kasi people and their religious faith and their religious practices, which it's not clear that David Hume addresses them or is relevant to them. And so we need to expand our field in exactly the way that Dr. Biswas was doing today. And so it's exciting to be a part of that conversation. And I think I do feel that today in 2025 that we're standing on a kind of open doorway or a threshold to making a conversation that is authentically global and authentically pluralistic, that includes the perspectives from people from all over the world. Um, so that said, to respond to specifically to what Dr. Biswas said, I think maybe it's helpful to talk about where I think he and I have our approaches are different, and especially in this conversation about the methods in philosophy, where our approaches are different, and also where they overlap and they resemble each other and they're similar. Um, this, I hope, gives this particular audience and anyone who watches this video um, a sense that there are choices to be made in philosophy of religion, and you have to decide, well, but what methods sound like they're the most productive in my eyes, and what do I want to defend? So here's the first difference. I have two differences and two similarities. So here's the first difference. I described what I call expansive naturalism, or methodological naturalism, or non-reductive naturalism. And you may remember, I know I was speaking too quickly, but you may remember I talked about like subatomic particles to atoms to molecules to cells to animals to groups. And I said all of these are natural things. And so there's no reason why we cannot include belief in God or money or um, all kinds of intentional realities that exist, you might say, in a group's norms or in their minds um, as part of the natural. But uh, but Dr. Biswas's presentation helps me clarify that that's a monistic ontology, right? There's only everything that starts from the material world of subatomic particles and atoms and molecules and cells and up these levels until you get to things that are very abstract, like capitalism or communism as ideologies. I'm saying that capitalism and communism as ideologies are real things in the natural world, unlike the reductive or scientific naturalists. But that's still a monistic ontology with only the natural and nothing supernatural. So the choice then is I liked the language that you used of superimposition, that the supernatural can inform the natural world, or can be superimposed on the natural world, or can be experienced in the natural world, and have an effect on people's lives. So there's a choice, I think. What sounds to you in the audience, and to everyone practicing philosophy now, as more promising, a monistic ontology that only accepts, whatever has been built from atoms up to very complicated realities, but it's only the natural, or a pluralistic ontology that is not restricting itself to the natural, but includes um, things that are difficult to put into words, or maybe impossible to put into words, and we only have um, um, I'm tempted to say mystical, mystical perceptions or touches that other kind of reality that doesn't fit into atoms and molecules and cells. It's different. And so there's a choice, I think, for the future of philosophy of religion. There are two models or two methods that are live options. Some people, I think, would agree with me that naturalism is more scientific and they like it more. And other people, I think, will agree with a more mystical or open-minded, a philosophy open to the supernatural. So that's one difference between the two of us. The other one, and that's such an amazing sentence that you said. I had to write it down about where did I put it? Oh, language should not kill us. What a beautiful and dramatic sentence to say. Um, it reminds me of this uh, famous saying, famous quote that in the West, in scientific cultures, and here I am promoting a scientific and naturalistic model, and so I want to not be guilty of this, that if you take that kind of a model, you kill something so that you can dissect it. but then you don't have the living creature anymore. You don't have the living animal anymore because you wanted to analyze it and break it down into its parts. And that's precisely what I was doing, right? I was saying, oh, everything can be um, um, emerging from atoms and subatomic particles. Um, but can love be reduced to atoms and subatomic particles? Can God be reduced to those things? So I have that naturalistic model, which is not like a pluralistic model, but it's also I'm putting a lot of hope in what language can do without killing the topics that we care about as scholars of religion. Um, on the other side, on Dr. Biswas's side, you have a kind of negative theology, a recognition of that some things are unsayable. He said unmeanable, like they're just not accessible to, you might say, mere human concepts that are trying to chop up the world and say, oh, it's a this, it's not a that. Like some things don't fit into those concepts. So I'm over here. I think my hands help. I'm over here and I'm optimistic about our ability to put things into words, to explain to each other, to articulate and conceptualize. And maybe I have now the limited philosophy because over here, Dr. Biswas is presenting a more mystical view that says there's things that escape language and go further. We shouldn't have the kind of commitment to our concepts that would actually kill the things that we care about the most. So there's the two differences I saw between our views that maybe we will talk about more as the conversation goes on. But just to underline two similarities. Number one, we're both committed to a global philosophy of religion and to a broader philosophy of religion and to a phenomenological or anthropological version of philosophy of religion that begins with a person who's feeling something, a person who's loving something, a person who is um, engaged in the world, and we want to understand those people's experience. And the question is whether, a naturalistic, monistic ontology and a commitment to language does that, or we want something else. But we both agree, I think, that philosophy of religion needs to evolve and become richer and become global and include Kasi people of India, Bali and Sumatra and Java and all the places that were described. But here is a point of similarity or agreement between the two of us that it's very important to me, and I never mentioned it, and so I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about it now, and it's the word enactive or enaction that Dr. Biswas used. So here's my naturalistic approach to that word. Um, I do not think that human experiences can be fully understood if you just look at the brain or the senses or the body or all those things that I listed, the atoms, the molecules, the cells, that like I believe that a human animal, and every animal, but a human animal is in an environment and they're interacting with that larger environment. And the interactions between the experiencing animal and the environment enact or create or produce or generate realities in the world that had not been there before. And I think I'm starting to sound a little bit mystical right now, but I'll give you a very naturalistic and scientific example. Light waves are bouncing around my office right now, and the sun has been sending these light waves. These are from lights, but the sun has been sending light waves for billions of years, and they bounce off the world. It's only a few hundreds of millions of years ago that animals evolved cells in their body that have what's called opsins that respond to a photon when it hits it. And we have these opsins in our eyes, and we have different cones in our eyes that are sometimes called red, green, and blue cones. So a photon hits the opsin, it changes its shape, it releases a chemical, and the chemical gets triggered, and the electrical impulse goes down our optic nerves, and our eyes see those light waves as red or green or blue or as combinations, and then you end up with orange or whatever. Um, this is what I'm proposing. Before there were eyes, there was no color in the universe. There was light waves, but it wasn't color until you had animals. So on the one side, you have light waves. On the other side, you have the eyeball, and they interact and they create and they generate color. So when you walk around and there's this beautiful, like in my part of the mountains, the leaves are turning from green to orange. You have this amazing color that people will travel across my country to come see these trees that look like they're on fire because they're so bright. That's all a product, not of the tree by itself and not of the animal by itself, but it's an enactive, generated, interactive reality. So I want to push past a reductive naturalism that just says, let's look at the properties of the tree, or let's look at the properties of the person. You have to look at their interaction. And I hope that what I'm describing now, this inactive reality that's generated between things, not in either one of them, but between them, fits into what Dr. Biswas called an anthropological approach to studying religious experience, not just color experience, but religious experience of the sacred and the holy and the beautiful and the morally right. All those things, I think they're real, but they're inactive. And I think this is the future of philosophy of religion, to stop having this dualism of mind and body, but to start to look at the relationships between them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin. I think it's correspond to your 2023 books, yeah, Earthly Things. Okay, the audience can find the books and you can find the article written by Professor Kevin. Okay, next, your turn, Professor Biswas, to state your comment.
Yes, I'm so very enchanted, as if, I'm experiencing an enchanted spirit from the Amazonian after I have listened to Professor Kevin. This whole explanation of inactivism that comes from him in terms of generating certain layers of experiences in a non-reductive sense, and in the sense of making it a part and parcel of our being, unifying it with our being, which goes in the name of what David Bohm has once called as the implicate order. The implicate order of the universe, where hollow movement happens between beings and entities all the time. And this is what precisely is a more holistic description of our religious reality or religious experience. And in ethnographic terms, you have its manifestations. And these manifestations are very, very important. Though I have talked about Montgomery notion of Carnegie, you have parallel such notions. You have in Brazilian context, in Amazonian forest, you have tribes that talk about impilo, which is like an inner spirit. Or in Africa, you have ukufa, a kind of an inner light. Or you have umoya among the Mayans, in the upper Amazonians, where it's not a revelatory understanding of a spirit, but it's a kind of an inner sparkle, a kind of an imakudo, as is there in Bible. It's a kind of an inner generation of a light which is more than the visual light, a light that comes from within, and that light goes into a kind of an enchantment and a direct contact with the spirit world, which manifests itself in the form of certain cults like shamanism. Now, these kind of concrete religious practices actually creates a different sense of ontology. The sense of ontology that it creates in terms of its avowal of meanings, how meanings are attributed. And once meanings are generated and attributed in our language, the language has to be then regrounded back into the experience. So it's a double movement. At one level, it's a movement from the self to the world. At another level, it's a kind of a reverse movement from the world to the self. It's kind of a Maulopuntian embodiment that happens in the religious experience. And this is where I completely agree with Professor Schilbrack. The only little difference is, I would say, difference in the name of methodology, which is not a real difference. Methodologically, one starts with a kind of a scientific ontology, and one critiques the scientific ontology and expands it towards a kind of a more faith-based, practice-based, ritual-based form of life ontology. A form of life ontology goes beyond the scientific ontology of fundamental particles like fermions, bosons, or muons, or mesons, etc., etc. These kind of naming of entities is somewhat hyper-intentional, wherein our own practical life, intentional entities suffice at the first order and the second order. We do not need to move beyond the first order and the second order unless we need to go into a deeper understanding of reality. In our ordinary moral lives, in our practical experience, the manifestation of intentional entities through our self-knowledge or self-awareness, or in terms of a critical self-examination, provides enough of a ground to move towards the manifestations of faith-based experiences, where faith is a priori to an experience. So therefore, methodologically speaking, we have to look at the a priori possibility of having faith. And a priori possibility of having faith is the basic condition of possibility of having other entities as part of our common ontology. That's the only methodological difference as far as I understand. The second important difference, if it is at all a difference, is our idea of language. Linguistically, how do you render this entire trajectory of understanding entities and beings, and also understanding our own understanding in linguistic terms without resorting to meta language or a formal language? And this is where language has to be kept at the level of where our faith is speaking to us, or where we are trying to address what our faith tells us to address. Linguistically, it has to be kept at the level of an interactive, intersubjective language instead of reducing the language to a meta language or to a formal language. So there is a possibility that I see that we can go to Alvin Plantinga-like counterfactual meta language, or some other kind of meta language, in contrast to which we have this current understanding of rethinking of the animated world in terms of animistic intelligence. We have various kind of strange entities that we discuss in our language. We have various kind of work, for example, work of Antasia Pilavsky, where Antasia is talking about spirits and the other worlds, how we can travel to the spirits and the other worlds. That's not exactly a kind of a methodological step, but that's quite a leap of faith that will require its own methodology, which may follow after we have taken such a step. I think this is where I end, and I believe that me and Professor Kevin share a huge common ground, and our differences are only peripheral. It requires more conversations to really raise questions and see how we can reflect on those questions. Thanks, Professor Kevin, Professor Rodinel, and other listeners at this point of time. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Biswas. Professor Kevin, do you have any other comments, or we just go to the next sessions?
I can talk all day about these things. They're exciting to be in a room that's forward-looking about the philosophy of religion. But perhaps we should open it up for anyone else who wants to ask questions.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Biswas. Okay, before we go to the Q&A sessions, and then I will invite you, the audience, to join the Q&A sessions by raising your hand or by directly activating your microphone. But before we go jump into the sections, let me summarize a little bit about Professor Biswas first and then Professor Gavin. I think one point that really got me from Professor Biswas, that you emphasize the unspeakable dimensions of religious experience, namely mystical experience and so on. Once we take that experience and articulating them to the various language expressions, it will be to reductive things. And what about the unconceivable things? I think this is my question for Professor Biswas and Professor Kevin. Last month, I read the article in the local website that I introduced Menongianism's way to talk about God. And I said that round square, God, goddess, and so on, which very, very complicated things to handle, oftenly handled by the people, and said that this kind of entity is unconceivable because we never met God, we never find the round square and so on. But in Manugian sense, we have to divide the properties that compose that objects. For example, the roundness and the squareness and so on. And I apply that things to the way I interpreting God and the way I discussing God, because whatever we define God, it always correspond to the certain particular properties, namely the conceivable properties that we got or we obtain from our spatiotemporal life, yeah, and so on. Uh, can you give a short comments on how to treat the unconceivable things in religious work or the philosophy of religions projects to cover all kind of ontology? Thank you. I think that's my question before we go to the Q&A sessions.
Dr. Biswas, would you go first?
No, Professor Kevin, you can respond first because I have some sore
Yeah.
throat. I'm just clearing my throat. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think the question that Rodi is bringing up is as I see it, the most difficult question for your pluralistic ontology.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
as I see it, you're absolutely right that there will be Muslims who are mystics and they feel a relationship and a presence of God, and there will be Christians as well. But then the Christians say, but God is in three persons, and not the way that Muslims understand it. And God has become a human, and it was Jesus who appeared to Saint Teresa in her prisons, in herself, you know. And then there will be animists who say, but we appreciate having indigenous philosophies brought into the discussion about philosophy of religion, but we don't have this eternal creator God that we've never experienced this thing. We have perhaps a spirit or the spirits in the plural in the river or in this mountain or in the air. But it's not in another world up in heaven. It's here, and so you end or the Kasi view that includes a feminine conception of God. So you've got four different versions there. You've got Allah and the Trinity and the masculine and feminine Kasi conception and the animist conception. And so if you say, well, but what are the people actually experiencing? Um, you're going to know this already. John Hick, the British philosopher, he said, well, language won't reach it because it's noumenal and it's beyond all concepts, but it's the same. They're all experiencing the same thing. But how does he know they're experiencing the same thing? Their description sounds so different. And so if you say, well, what they experience, it's just a metaphor or it's unconceptualizable or it goes beyond language, we don't want to bring it into language which would kill it, then it's not clear that you are talking about the same thing or that they're talking about the same thing. But they seem like they're contradicting each other. So I think this is to be honest, this is what moved me from a John Hick's kind of pluralistic philosophy of religion to the naturalism that I described in my talk. So I look forward to hearing, like, how do you adjudicate the differences between the religious experiences that you help us see?
I think the question has been further heightened by the comments of Professor Kevin. I would start by saying that no inconceivable is non-negotiable. We can negotiate between one notion of inconceivable, just as we can make a pluralist claim about conceivability as something technically that which is acceptable to one system of faith should also remain open and accessible by another system of faith. In the same way, that which is inconceivable in one system of faith, whether it should be inconceivable in another system of faith or that which is inconceivable can be reinterpreted, re-understood, or reformulated in a different language, so that the inconceivable now appears to be conceivable. Now, there is no criterion that by which we can say something inconceivable now becomes conceivable. But when I say there is no criterion, in terms of religious pluralism and mutual translatability of concepts from one religion to another religion, we know the limitation of this translatability. And a part of it is inscrutable, cannot be known. Yet, it is not incommunicable. Something that I cannot conceive and something that is not meanable, let's say, in Hinduism. For example, the idea of annihilation of the soul is something that is not conceivable in Hinduism. But annihilation of the soul is conceived in terms of annihilation of the being, which includes the experiences of the body. And then it lifts up the annihilated body with its supernatural experience or supererogatory experience to a different level of existence altogether, which can rejoin the whole idea of transmigration as it comes in Hinduism. So, therefore, there are ways in which we can cover up certain gaps and certain differences and move on and can rejoin us where that gap has left us earlier. So, this is how we can negotiate between one discursive system of religion with another discursive system of religion. And finally, we can say that they have a kind of shared, mutually dependent co origination, as Buddhists would like to say. Now, this shared, mutually dependent co origination doesn't really allow us to have a uniform or monistic language. Languages will always be different. And because of the linguistic conception of what is conceivable and inconceivable, language creates a certain limit. And wherever my language is not able to express it, that's the end of my world, as Wittgenstein would be saying. That's where I will continue in silence. So there is a sense of silence, and silence is profound, and silence has a different depth in terms of religious experience. And inconceivable can be understood as a point of silence, as a point of no return, or as a point of enlightenment, or as a point of a different level of understanding of the God and its relationship with the world, the core issues of religious faith. So therefore, inconceivable needs to be interpreted, and interpreted in those terms that will either align with a discursive system, or it will create a new set of rules for another discursive system of religion. So this is how I would look at the notion of inconceivable from a pluralist standpoint. That's it. Thank you, Professor Kevin. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. Kevin and Prof. Biswas. Finally, we will go to the Q&A sessions. I invite the audience to join, and you can raise your hand. Okay, Alif Rizky Ramadan has been raised your hand. Okay, Alif, you can turn on your microphone.
Dr. Rodinal.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Biswas and Professor Kevin. Thank you for your enlightened discussion tonight. This philosophy of religion, or I will like to call it as religion as philosophy, is an issue that we in many countries have fight over. Philosophy is philosophy, and theology is theology, like what Professor Kevin has said earlier. Now, what I gather when discussing in this issue in the naturalism, we always talk about methodological naturalism, or we talk about pluralism naturalism. But can we solve this question about a natural God, and what Pliny the Elder had told us in his book Natural History? There's no consensus on God, the whim of God. We can call it God as 1, 2, 3, and 4, and etc. etc. But in the end of the day, the natural of God, the God nature, is always in our mind. Yes. So God in the end is just that one specific nature that we live on. And this kind of thinking, I think, reflect on what we perceive as religion as whole. Because in the end of the day, when we talk about religion, we don't talk about the godliness, but we always talk about the fact, the natural history that built upon that ideal concept. So why Abrahamic religion called this godliness as Allah and monotheistic view, or why the people of certain religion have their unique style of God, is because yes, as I was saying, there is their natural God order. To achieve that, they will build and rebuild their foundation. Like for example, in Java and Indonesian, they all, even though they are Islam, they still consider this all tradition and religion as the part of it. So yeah, I think according to me, it's far more broader to call it as natural God than we punching around against the concept of pluralism or methodological. Because yes, as what we discussed earlier, it will become something that we have to revise, and revise again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alif, Rizky, for your questions. I think it aligned with contemporary debate on theism and atheisms, and also aligned with Eugene Nagasawa perfect being theisms that advocate naturalistic view on God and so on. Okay, Prof. Kevin, do you want to first answer?
Alif, I'm not sure whether I have a good handle on your question, but I'm glad that you brought up this idea of the natural history of God. And I think David Hume's book about the natural history of religion, that is the seed from which the academic study of religion has grown. And so you will find historians who say, we want to look at the history of how people have understood God or how they have conceptualized God in their mind. But that's just a natural project. That's not we don't know what's supernatural. We're not interested in that. We're only as historians, we're interested in this. But then you also find sociologists who do the same thing, and anthropologists who do the same thing, and cognitive scientists who do the same thing, so that eventually you get the history of conceptions of God and the psychology of conceptions of God and the sociology and the gender study of conceptions of God. All of those things fit in my naturalistic model. I'm happy with that. Dr. Biswas is raising the question whether it's, you might say, missing perhaps the most crucial aspect, or even worse, killing the most crucial aspect, because they're limiting themselves to what they can conceptualize and what they can put in natural history. I'm comfortable with that because I understand philosophy of religion as what would you say, part of a family with the academic study of religion and all those other methodological disciplinary approaches. When you said the idea of God is just in someone's mind, I'm comfortable saying that, as long as I can borrow from Dr. Biswas that idea of inaction and the idea that the human being doesn't exhaust what's real, that the world is bigger than our concepts. It's bigger than what's in, quote unquote, in our mind. And so I know I'm trying to balance something that's very careful with not introducing the supernatural, but including more than human concepts. It's a fine balance.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Kevin. Prof. Biswas, now your turn.
It's a very brief response. I think a large part of response is already given by Professor Kevin. I would simply say that monotheism actually conceives generally of a supreme God, but there's a reality which is below this supreme God that the supreme God doesn't address, or there's a reality that is beyond this supreme God as well, which is just not spoken of. It remains totally inconceivable within the frame of monotheism. From the point of view of studies of philosophy of religion, we would critique monotheism, what monotheism expresses and what it doesn't express. That needs to be critiqued. And once you do this kind of a critiquing, you get certain support from other faiths and other systems as well. So you can draw from other systems and borrow and sustain your critique of monotheism. It's always possible. So methodologically, you can go outside the frame of monotheism to sustain a critique against monotheism, and especially what it suppresses, what it doesn't really speak of. So this is how I think I look at the problem that you have posed. Thanks, Alif. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Biswas. Next, we'll move to the question that has been written in message box from Safi Rahman. Good evening. I would like to ask both speakers. My question is one, how might advances in artificial intelligence and neurosciences reshape the philosophy of religion in the coming decades, particularly in debates about consciousness, the soul, and the nature of divine experience? The second question is, how might emerging scientific paradigms, technological advancements, and shifting cultural attitudes reshape the central questions and methods of the philosophy of religion in the coming decades? That is the two questions. I think I will start from Professor Biswas first and the next Professor Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, of course, very contemporary, of a great significance and relevance, what Mr. Safi is asking. But the first thing that I want to say, that with the progress of artificial intelligence, what has happened is a kind of an enhancement of our spiritual experience. We
Wow.
have an enhanced capacity of a kind of an enactive experience of matters related to the faith, matters related to faith, such as something that is supernatural, something that is not known as an entity in the world, but something that is part of the world of faith, or something that is make believe, actually constitutes a new kind of a domain of knowledge for the artificial intelligence to grapple with. And once artificial intelligence grapples with it, it enables us to think about that form of reality, reality beyond, in certain terms that it supplies to us. But all the time, we try to transcend those terms that are supplied to us by an artificial agent or by an experience that is generated by AI. So we like to transcend those terms, and we try to arrive at certain first principles, as if those first principles are part of the core values of a religious system. So the religious system gets more and more strengthened and entrenched in the process of enhancing our knowledge of religion through artificial intelligence. It doesn't really dilute it. And this gives you the answer to your second question, that scientific paradigms reshape the same old religious questions, but by reshaping it, it tries to connect it to the latest scientific advances. Like Professor Kevin was talking about, we are all constituted by fermions, or we are all sitting in a world where neutrinos are passing through our body, for example. So these fundamental particles and subatomic particles, and then the whole experience of superposition or teleportation or collapse of the quantum state into an ordinary practical state, all these phenomenon, all these events are connected to a certain kind of religious experience, and this connection is built up through a discourse, through a discourse or through a discursive process. And this discursive process is part of the existing religious discourse as well. So this is how it is all accommodated within the larger process of philosophizing about religion and religious discourse. Saif, yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Biswas. Next, Professor Kevin.
This is definitely a cutting edge question. If I can separate the artificial intelligence and the neuroscience, I'm not sure how artificial intelligence will reshape philosophy of religion, but it seems to me that artificial intelligence is reshaping religion. You know, I recently saw an advertisement. You can make these artificial intelligent, what's the word, where they answer your questions. And so you can say, what's the capital of China or whatever, but you can also get a girlfriend who is artificial intelligence, and you can say, you know, tell me a joke, and you can have like an electronic friend. I saw an advertisement that said you can talk to God and you don't need to go to church. You know, you can just go online and type in your question and God will answer you directly. And I think that the effect of on religion of artificial intelligence will be like an acid that dissolves the social groups where they can stay at home and they can type on their computer or interact with the Alexa or the voice, and feel like they've got a relationship that does not have to include other people. Um, I worry about that. I don't really know whether it will have benefits or costs for the practice of religion. I know that my mother, when she goes to church, she doesn't want to miss the coffee after church and talking to the minister and just being a social person, and she doesn't want to stay at home. Like that would be terrible for her. But when I look at the effect of artificial intelligence on politics in my country, where people will be online and they will think, but I asked all these different people, hundreds, thousands of different people online, and they all told me this, and they don't know that these are just artificial intelligence bots that are repeating each other. And so they get captured in a kind of epistemic bubble where they don't know alternatives. And so I don't know. I worry about the artificial intelligence part. I'm more optimistic about the neuroscience part because for me, the developments in cognitive science and neuroscience that are the most exciting are the ones that include the body. And so you have a movement of embodied cognitive science. Sometimes it's called 4E, like the letter and the number, 4E cognitive science, 4E neuroscience. And this is moving away from the idea that your mind can be disembodied and it can just get data and computate an answer and give an answer. That this idea, this 4E idea, is that your mind is necessarily in a brain. Your brain is necessarily in a body. The way that you think, the things that you're able to think, it all has to do with the fact that we have the senses that we do, and we have our bodies that are vertical, and then we have the hands that we do, and we've had the experiences that we've had. I think if philosophy of religion would take embodied cognition into itself as a better understanding of what cognition is and what perception is, it would philosophers would start to include ritual more, pilgrimage more, fasting more, body modification more, pain more, and those topics have been largely ignored by philosophers of religion. So I hope that, to answer your second question, that the development of neuroscience helps philosophers of religion understand people as in communities where they do actions together in their bodies. I think that would be healthy.
Thank you, Prof. Kevin. I think we have to move to the next question, but I think I will read the two questions and you can answer at once. First, questions by from Rumaiza Abubakar. She's my friend from Malaysia. How should philosophy of religion evolve to respond to the rise of spiritual fluidity and hybrid belief systems? And the questions from Ritu Porna, I think this is quite similar. Will classical theistic metaphysics survive in a world dominated by naturalism? Okay, I think that is the questions. Okay, who will come first? Prof. Biswas or Prof.
I
Kevin?
think I'll come first, huh?
Okay.
Then
Okay.
Professor Kevin can give, he will get a chance to think and give a better answer to the questions. But to begin with, the discussion. The first question by Abu Bakr is actually talking about spiritual fluidity and hybrid belief structures, which I called as Butinage. And Butinage is crossing over from one faith to the other faith. So this crossover happens right in Indonesia. In Bali, I have seen that outside homes, there are some small temple-like structures, and there are certain Hindu gods are sort of changed or transformed into uh, some attributes of Allah and that is further connected to some attributes of Jesus Christ and also of Lord Buddha. So you have an idol that comprises of all the four religions just outside Bali, some of the homes in Bali, as you move towards a famous Bali temple where this Ramayana performance happens. And that was one example of butinage. In actual practices, in many of the Indonesian archipelagos, we have communities, let's say, communities in Kalimangal actually have a belief in snake and snake bite and how snake transforms itself into a snake goddess. Now, similar belief you see in Java. You go further down, you see it in other parts of Indonesia, in Sumatra, and beyond Sumatra. You can go to the other archipelagos and you will see how snake becomes a common object of belief, manifesting itself in different ways. Now, these beliefs are part of kind of folk religious belief. And this folk religious belief merges with the systems of religion, be it Islam, be it Hinduism, be it Buddhism, be it some other forms. So there is always an inner possibility of a larger system of religion merging with the folk beliefs. And this is something very significant that keeps the religious beliefs survive in different intellectual, cultural conditions. And this is what is a kind of a hybrid mode of religious experience. It's also very fluid. And this happens across the world. In Appalachian, for example, from where Professor Kevin comes, there are these indigenous First Nations or indigenous communities who have a practice of animism, a certain kind of animistic intelligence, attribution of intelligence to objects of nature. And then that is further transformed into a notion of intelligent gods and goddesses in the life of the community. And again, many of them believe in Christianity. So two modes of religious practices coexist, and journey from one to the other is absolutely fluid. It's like a crossover. And this crossover is part of the a kind of a naturalistic understanding of religion itself. So you have pluralism embedded in naturalism, and a naturalism that sustains a certain kind of pluralism from within. So this is the way we can theorize about it. Coming to Rituparna's question, which is again a very, very vital question. A theistic metaphysics actually has to lower its foundations. It cannot keep its foundations as higher form of reality, because there is no way to move from the experience of practical life to something that is supernatural, something that is ethereal. It's rather the case that one descends from supernatural, ethereal to something that is practical. So in order to sustain theistic metaphysics, we have to lower its foundation. We have to bring it down from the level of absolute reality to the level of empirical reality. And you know the system of Sri Aurobindo, he talks about super consciousness, but this super consciousness comes through consciousness of the empirical reality. So there is a way of involution and evolution that Aurobindo talks about. So every religion has this process of involution and evolution, the process of vitalistic evolution and involution. And that is how theistic metaphysics can survive in an era of naturalism. I'm just giving you a kind of a rough and ready answer without thinking much. The next answer from Professor Kevin is, of course, add a new dimension to it, I expect. Thanks.
Thank you for the extra time so that I could think about it. The first question is, how should philosophy of religion evolve given the rise of spiritual fluidity and hybridity? And I think that religion is changing, to be sure. People on the opposite sides of the earth are now able to meet each other in person, let alone, see each other in mediated ways. I have a friend who wrote a paper called Worship Upstairs, Yoga Downstairs. And he said that was the name of a sign he saw at a church where they said, we're going to do yoga after worship services. And so you've got the hybridity that you're talking about. I think this should definitely have an effect on philosophy of religion, and in particular on our conceptions of religion. My students will assume that a religion is a set of beliefs. And they think, well, my church has doctrines and I'm supposed to agree with those doctrines. So I assume other religions are like that also. And they'll ask me, so what is it that Buddhists believe, or what is it, what do the animists believe? And I think that's already framing the question of religion in a way that's not helpful to understand the fluidity and hybridity that you're talking about, because lots of people, lots of groups don't have doctrines. What they have is a certain way of raising their children and a certain way of dressing and eating, and um, they have a form of life. They have a way of living. And if you said, but how do you understand these metaphysical questions? They are not especially interested in them, and they don't have any leisured intellectuals that are sitting around writing books to develop that kind of stuff. So I think it should change our definition of religion, and we should say something. We shouldn't say a religion is a set of beliefs. I have a Wittgenstein-inspired polythetic or family resemblance definition of religion, but I want to put practices central. So a person can say, but I do worship upstairs and I do yoga downstairs, and that's my religion. But that's because practices are central. And if there's conflicts between the metaphysical beliefs of these two practices, they haven't explored it and they're not especially interested in it. Um, Basically, I have a religion as a composite. It has a whole bunch of different elements, and you could take away one of the elements and replace it with something else. But like the ship of Theseus metaphor, you still have your same boat or functionally the same boat. But anyway, let's move away from doctrines and beliefs as the essence of religion. I guess that's the short answer. Um, for the second question, I think there is a conflict. I think there's a tension between classical theistic metaphysics and the ontological naturalism that says there's nothing supernatural. I don't see how those two can be reconciled. And I think Dr. Biswas referred to Dr. Plantinga, and Plantinga says, I am a classical theistic metaphysician, and therefore I think naturalism is false, right? It's problematic. It's incoherent. He wants to argue it. You can't believe in naturalism and evolution and be consistent with yourself. So he wants to shoot down naturalism. I think there's a tension there, and so people have to choose where they go. But I'm hoping that methodological naturalism, for example, with the doctor and the judge that I mentioned in my talk, they could say, I do hold to classical theistic metaphysics, but methodologically, when I'm wearing my hat as a doctor, I don't answer medical questions by looking in scripture or by thinking that an eternal being is the answer to why you're sick or why you're healthy, or why you're guilty or innocent in the courtroom. So I think a person can be methodological naturalist and be part of a naturalistic culture, even while they personally believe that this world was created by a loving parent. That's my hope. Thanks for that good question.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Kevin and Professor Biswas. Unfortunately, okay, we run out of time for this session, for this event. Yeah, in Yogyakarta, the clock shows that it's been 21, almost 22 o'clock. Yeah, closer to the middle night. Yeah, and once again, I deeply appreciate for the participation of the audience to the discussions and the engagement with very, very good and very, very interesting questions. And to close this event, I would like to remind that, okay, this event is the milestone or the stepping stones for us in Indonesia to develop our philosophy. We know that we have a bunch of things that we need to explore regarding the philosophy of religions. We have a lot of indigenous religious belief and so on that okay always shaped and framed by the colonial point of view. We know that Indonesia is a post-colonial country and so on, and it also affected the methodology that been used in our academic life in Indonesia that we tend to appreciate or to 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 give a chance for colonialistic point of view to share the view. And on behalf of Lingkar Studi Filsafat Odyssey or the Philosophy Circle Studies Odyssey and Ruangan Filsafat, we are the two community that host this event, Professor Biswas and Professor Kevin. We would like to say very, very thank you. Thank you so much for your coming, for your willingness to share your table notions, for your fruitful discussion tonight. Once again, thank you very much. See you on the next event, maybe with another philosopher. And today, I sent email to Professor Eugene Nagasawa to confirm the perfect bintisms, and okay, it's very, very interesting things to discuss in Indonesia and also in global scope. Thank you very much, Prof. Kevin. Enjoy your time. Clap for us, yeah, applause for us. And Professor
I thank
Biswas.
you. I thank you, Professor Rodinel. I particularly also thank Muhammadullah, Arpita,
Yeah,
and Rituparna
our
for
friend from
joining from
India.
Bangladesh and India. I also thank Professor Safi for asking a very meaningful question, and my thanks and gratitude to Professor Kevin as well. So I take
Thank you
leave
very
of you.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. See you next time. Thank you.